Welcome to this presentation on combating corruption at the grassroots. I am Vivek and I work with the program on liberation technology at Stanford University. In this talk, we will basically look at how to use technology in a way that we are able to engage and create transparency for people at the grassroots. So we will distinguish between a lot of other technologies that are typically used by journalists, especially investigative journalists, or NGOs, or people in certain higher positions, and instead focus on how to create technology that involves the common person in creating transparency and helping them monitor various activities of the government, with a special intention of helping them from preventing the siphoning of resources that are meant for the poor. Considering that we are focused on the common person, we will talk about how to use mobile phone technologies, especially SMS and simple voice calls, and not so much smartphone applications or USSD or other more complex technologies. Now, SMSs, which is one of the major forms of disseminating information to people, has many advantages. To start with, there are many free software and reasonably cheap hardware that one could use to reach a large number of people. There are also online service providers in many countries who allow us to send out messages without having any software or hardware with us. It's also fairly easily to customize the messages that we send either to individuals or to small groups. For example, if you want to send a message to all the people of a particular village, it's quite easy to do that. So you can create messages village by village. At the receiver's end, the person can read it at any time, just like an email. And because the mobile phone is so portable, they can take the message and show it to somebody else. So, for example, if they were to meet an official and they want to say that I got this message saying that a new project is being implemented in my village, you can show the SMSs as a kind of proof in order to conduct the bargaining exercise. SMSs also have a lot of limitations. The shortness of the message makes it very difficult to make transparent anything that is complex. In addition, a lot of phones that people own don't have the capacity to display local language text. So, for example, if you send a message in languages like Hindi or Chinese, what you see will be different from what the person sees. The receiver may just get a set of question marks or boxes and they won't be able to read the local message, which leaves out a very large number of people for whom we are trying to create transparency through mobile phones. Even though for many of us SMS is very basic, it still requires a certain amount of skill to open the message and to read it, uh, which a very large number of people may not quite be able to do without some training. So it would be a fallacy to assume that SMSs reach absolutely everybody as long as they have a mobile phone. One way of getting around some of the disadvantages of SMS is to use voice calls, where you can record a voice call and disseminate it to a large number of people. There's nothing as basic as being able to pick up a call, and practically everybody who owns a mobile phone will know how to pick up a call. You can record a call in any language or dialect, so there's absolutely no bar on the nature of language in sending out voice calls. And there are also a lot of free software and reasonably low cost hardware with which you will be able to disseminate calls to a certain number of people. Though I should say that the larger number of people you try to reach, the requirement for hardware and skillful engineers will start increasing. Among the many limits of voice calls, the first being that the call is not durable. So, unlike an SMS, you cannot take it to an official and show the person the message that you received. Another curious problem is that finding the right time to call a person is actually a huge challenge. Now, you don't want to call a person when they're at work or when they're in a toilet or when they're busy and not ready to take the call. But there are other practical problems as well, especially if you work in a rural area with very poor connectivity. Often, the way people make a call is to go to a corner of a road where there's good signal. They can do that when they want to make a call, but if you want to reach them, you have to know when they will be in a place where there's network connectivity. So, finding the right time to call is quite a challenge, and that can lead to fairly substantial dropout in the number of people that you are able to reach effectively. Just like SMSs, voice calls have to be short and relatively simple, and every call costs. So, the larger number of people that you want to reach, the much higher the cost would tend to be. Finally, personalized messages for each individual or for groups take a lot more technical skill and effort. So, it's not as easy as with an SMS to create highly customized messages. But despite these limitations, which are quite substantial, basic feature phones offer an unprecedented ability to create transparency for people in the grassroots. And we will talk about some of the techniques that could be used in order to create an effective system of messaging. Now, keeping the limitations in mind, if we want to create an effective transparency mechanism, the most fundamental question that we need to ask is, what is it that we wish to make transparent? And we will answer that question by following a set of strategies that's summarized by the word acronym SHWAV. The acronym SHWAV stands for the list of things that you see on the screen, and I will start with the last of them. So the first requirement to creating an effective system of messaging, be it through recorded voice calls or through SMSs, is ease of understanding. The messages have to be short, they have to be self-contained or complete, and they cannot depend on people knowing other things in order to be able to make sense of the message. In general, when we send a message, we don't want to qualify the messages by saying, if this happens, then that, or by providing detailed explanations of terms and so on. Because of the nature of the phone and the nature of communication that happens through it, such qualifications or explanations will get lost among the receivers. Very often, it's useful to repeat the message, which also means that the fundamental message needs to be really short in order to repeat it once or twice so people are able to get the message and are able to memorize them, especially for voice calls. Now, ease of the message is one important thing, and another equally important factor is value. Unless the message that we send is relevant in a sense that it's the right message for the right person, then the purpose of the call will start getting lost. Apart from selecting the right message for the right person, on which I will discuss a little bit more soon, there are also questions such as, how often should we make the call or send the SMS? For how long should we sustain the intervention for it to have value? Now, the reason it's important to consider this is that very often when you want to combat corruption at the grassroots, it's not going to happen by sending one message or just working on something for a week or for a month. Very often you may have to engage on a particular issue for a substantial period of time, maybe a year or two, depending on the seriousness of the issue, depending on the nature of the challenge, and so on. So, in that sense, for an intervention to have value, we shouldn't just think about the kind of message that we want to send, but we also have to think in terms of how often do we want to do it and for how long we want to sustain it. Now, another thing to think about is that if you want to reach a large number of people, it can get quite costly. One way of distributing the cost is to tell people that they can call a number that you advertise. People will pay for the calls. Now, in most countries, incoming calls are free, which means that if you host the information and people call you, you don't pay for the calls, which is the largest proportion of the cost in creating a transparency system like this. But in order for people to call you, you need to think about what it is that people are willing to pay for. Is the information that you put out there valuable enough that people will pay the cost of making a phone call to listen to it? An important aspect of value comes from what I call as actionability. In a sense, the point of creating transparency is to change something. So maybe to combat corruption, to improve the accountability of the government and so on. And it is a simple thing to say the change will not happen just by sending out a message. Somebody has to do something with the information for the change to happen. Um, any kind of information that helps people in action is an actionable information. So let me illustrate this with some examples. You could send a message saying that $50 million has been allocated for building roads in the national budget. For the person who receives this information, yes, it is useful. But what can most people, let's say living in rural areas, do with this message? You cannot monitor whether the amount has been spent or not. You cannot go and use this as a basis of bargaining with your local officials. All you can do is maybe to account for this information when you turn up for election and select a person. So in that sense, even though there is some value to this message, it lends itself to action in very limited ways. Now contrast this with a message which says $50,000 has been allocated for building a road in your village or in your locality. This is an information that you can use to monitor whether the road is being constructed in your village or not. It's a concrete activity that you can do. And if the road is not constructed, or if you feel like the quality of construction is very poor for spending $50,000, then at least you can take this issue up and make sure that the money is spent properly. So, in that sense, the actionability of the information is a little bit more plausible in the second case than in the first. Now, let's take a third case. Here, suppose if you send a message saying that you, the person receiving the message, was paid $52 for working in the road project. It is something that the person will be immediately able to recognize. They know whether they've received the money or not. They know whether they've received the complete money or not. And having that information, suppose if they've been underpaid, will help them take action on it. So in that sense, the actionability of the information is a little bit better in the latter case. So what we have done here in some sense is to move from macro information at the large national scale into micro information pertaining to the locality or to the particular village or to the person himself or herself. So the more local the information becomes, the more individualized information becomes. It's a lot easier for people to relate to it, and there are more levers that people have to do something about it. Now, there's a large class of information that pertains to the micro world that could be easily sent through phones. These include payments that are made to individuals by the administration or by NGOs, various projects that are located in a village or a locality that people can easily monitor in their day-to-day lives. Different resources that are allocated to village, but also a lot of how-to information. By this, I mean practical information that you give people on, for example, how to apply for a particular program, how to complain about a grievance, how to contact a social worker or a local NGO, or which official to contact for different grievances and so on. So such practical information can assist people in taking action, and thus they can be quite valuable for people at the grassroots. So what we are saying here is that information should be relevant, but that is not all. The information that we send should be relevant to a current problem. Now, in my case, I started asking people in many villages if they would like me to make them a phone call announcing how many rupees they should get as pensions that particular month. In many villages, people said that this would be absolutely useful because the amount of pension they get changes every month and they don't quite know what they are supposed to receive. And often they feel cheated. In other villages, they said, look, I see on the TV all the time how much pension should be given. I get that amount every month, so I know that I'm getting the full pension. So if you make me a call and say that I have to get 200 rupees, it is of no value to me. So in that sense, just sending some information that is relevant to the person because he or she is a pensioner is not enough. Information will be actionable if it pertains to some problem that they face currently. In addition, in many cases, when I ask people, do you want information on a particular thing? They would say, yes, it is a problem, but I know that I cannot do anything about it. If I take up this grievance, I know that I will be beaten up. I know that as an individual, I cannot do anything about it. So, apart from being relevant to a specific problem, unless the information is also something that people can use to bring about change, the usefulness of such information will be limited. Very often, the usefulness of information depends a lot on how organized people are. The more organized people are, their ability to do something with it is much stronger. So, one element that we should consider in building any messaging system is how is it that could be used to build greater unity. Now, I can give a few examples about it. There is a wonderful messaging platform called Avaz Day, where it enables people to talk to each other. So you can identify common grievances, you can share information about common struggles, you can share information about what struggles have succeeded in different villages and whatnot, which can build a sense of solidarity and unity among different people. Now, to take another example, a project called CG Netswara uses a system where they consciously have journalists who are people located in faraway tribal villages who are constantly ignored by the mainstream media. They create news items using feature phones by just recording a message. These messages are transcribed and they are posted by the administrators on Facebook, where it reaches a large, more mainstream middle class community who often then start taking a proactive role in problems that happen in a far corner of the world. So, in that sense, it's often possible to build a system in a way that it creates a certain degree of unity and organization. But very often, unlike the social media platforms, there is a limitation to how far you'll be able to use feature phones in order to build greater organization or unity. But what could be done quite easily is to build the system for a community. Now, let's say that you know that there is already a group that is well organized in a particular region. The system can be created for the particular group to use. Now, let's say that there's a well organized NGO which operates in, let's say, 50 villages. Creating a system for them so that they can identify what messages are pertinent to this particular region, what are the current problems, what are the problems they're actively working on. Then the message that goes through the system would be relevant to the local problems, but it will also be relevant to the kind of strategies and actions that they have created. So we know that typically communities that are well organized do a number of different things when confronted with a social problem. They build alliances with administration and others. They have people with different kinds of skill sets that are required for negotiation. You may have a person who is very good at organizing demonstrations. Somebody else may be a good lawyer who can step in case of legal trouble, or there may be others with good connections in the government, etc. People with multiple skill sets are often quite critical, and that communities often possess them. And they typically have a lot more resources for taking up action than an individual does. Communities in general assess what kind of struggle they want to take up based on the alliances that they have, the resources they have, the political situation, and other factors. So, if we create a system for such communities, the transparency initiative that comes out of it should be aligned to their strategies. In other words, suppose if they are struggling to, let's say, end corruption in pensions or a particular program, whereas the transparency initiative sends messages on something completely different, let's say roads, the value of this information will be somewhat limited. Thus, the actionability of the information and its usefulness will depend very critically on how closely it is aligned to the current strategies that communities have in order to fight different problems that they value. So that gives us a very quick summary of some of the critical things that I think we should take into account in building a transparency system through mobile phones in a way that it is useful at the grassroots. Now, the Schwab strategy is a fairly simple set of rules, yet it is highly consequential for the kind of design that we can create using this. Among other things, a critical implication of this is that whatever transparency mechanism we create should be localized. It is often very easy to create one system wherein the same message can be broadcast to all the people in a particular state or the whole country. Whereas because the problems vary by locality, ideally messages that are sent through the system should also be highly localized. So platforms that send the same information to everyone might thus be inefficient. Similarly, it also says that localization means that we have to get feedback from the ground in order to disseminate the most appropriate kind of information. Building that into a system is actually quite a challenge. One way of thinking about it would be to say that you create a system that would be used by people in the locality, that will be controlled by local activists or local administrators, so that they appreciate what kind of local issues are pertinent and they're able to disseminate information accordingly. Other kinds of ideas can also be thought about, but the fundamental idea that information should be localized to current problems cannot be done without for an efficient system. Anyone who has the experience of working with civil society organizations and communities know that the issues that they struggle on keep changing all the time. The methods they use to struggle also change really fast. So the nature of messages that you send should also be highly dynamic. Now, this is in some sense a self-evident point, but it is an easy one to miss because in the process of building a technology to disseminate, you invest a lot of time in putting together a database, in creating a system of sending out information that we often don't make it dynamic enough. So strategies change fast, and so we need to create a system that is dynamic, that reflects current struggles in the locality, and not so much the easiest data set that is available. And the system should also realize that messaging through mobile phones by itself will only have a limited impact. For transparency to translate into action, somebody has to do something about it. And so transparency has to be combined with all kinds of other measures such as grievance redressal, perhaps organizing demonstrations, etc. Keeping this in mind will help us develop interventions that respects the other aspects of action and perhaps helps strengthening some other aspects of them as well. And this is the only way in which we can create a system of transparency through mobile phones that has any real chance of challenging corruption at the grassroots. Thank you.